Hello, comrades, friends, fellow creatures of life. This is my final lecture on the history and philosophy of science. We're going to talk in this video about Paul Feyerabend, and he wrote a work called Against Method. Epistemological anarchism is that science should have no rules at all. Anything goes. He claimed, Paul Feyerabend, that for any method or set of rules that one decides to use, there is a case in the history of science where, had those rules been followed, an important discovery would not have been made. And so what he's saying is that science, like art, is a form of human creativity and should know no limits or bounds. Rather than striving for objectivity, science should be subjective. Feyerabend agreed with Thomas Quine about the incommensurability of paradigms, but he did not say perception was theory-laden. It is not theory-laden, but theory-determined. The theory tells us what we see and what we think we can see. Thomas Quine minimized method and trusted the scientific community, whereas Lakatos thought Quine made science too chaotic. Feyerabend thought that science was not chaotic at all, for Quine's normal science was dull and unimaginative. Feyerabend opposed the dogmatic arrogance that often comes to its devotees. The New Inquisition, Feyerabend believes that science has become the new church or community, oppressing all those who disagree with its conclusions. This suppresses creativity and imagination, for scientific method insists not that everyone believes the same thing, but also that all should think the same way. All critical scrutiny should be used and dogmatic views should be promoted, but highly criticized. An example is that many think that Galileo Galilei, which you can look on my other philosophy or history lectures, we have Galileo Galilei on there. For example, Galileo used observation to overcome religious dogma, but the opposite is the case, where his view was neither observed and his opponents had good evidence at the time to support a geocentric view of the universe, as opposed to a heliocentric view. After all, Galileo's telescopes could not observe parallaxes. The scientific community at the time opposed Galileo and the theories of Aristotle and Ptolemy. He was not alone, however. Many before, such as Copernicus, Giordano, Bruni, etc., had held to a heliocentric view. Point, theory, observation, and community were all wrong. Galileo was right. No scientific method, empiricism, positivism, the ideas of Karl Popper, of Thomas Kuhn, can account for this. Galileo created a new way to observe and describe the world, challenging observation rather than following it. Then he presents what's called the white noise problem. And the practical objection is a balance between common sense and encouraging creativity. Safety, infrastructure, medicine, and technology. So we can see it in those kinds of ways. Feyerabend on the separation of science and state. He says that science influences state affairs, but it is not authoritative or dictative as an infallible divine decree would be. An open society needs to be ruled by the democratic will of the people, not by science. People need to be informed of the facts in order that they can make better decisions for overall human well-being and knowable knowledge. In the 1940s, Robert Merton and the Norms of Science, he was the first to apply sociology to science and its historical development. He coined phrases such as role model and unintended consequences. He came up with 4 norms of science that it embraces: communalism, universalism, disinterestedness, organized skepticism. Communalism is that the theories are recognized and esteemed, but they are ideas that are owned by all. And then universalism is that a scientist's particulars, their sex, ethnicity, religious worldview, are irrelevant to their ideas. Disinterestedness. There we go. Scientists should be rewarded for the pursuit of science. Organized skepticism is that all ideas are to be tested with no dogmatic authorities. Scrutiny is applied to all ideas and all persons. Merton tried to describe the general structure of science, but he did not take into account scientific beliefs. The new school of sociology of science tried to explain why scientists behave, speak, think, and behave as they do. David Bloor presents the STRONG program in 4 parts: causality, impartiality, symmetry, and reflexivity. The STRONG program in the sociology of science, as said before, we have causality, social conditions that lead to a claim of knowledge, look at both and all successful and failed knowledge claims. No impartiality. We have symmetry. The same types of explanations should be used for all possible kinds of knowledge claims. Rules applying in all departments, including sociology. And this shows reflexivity. The symmetry principle is that scientists are no different than others in the sense that their beliefs are to be judged accordingly to same standards. Scientists are not the only ones seeking the truth of all reality. And so even the science of science, just as the history of history, should use the same principles, including the philosophy of philosophy. But what do each take to be good and bad beliefs? There are problems with truth. The symmetry principle rules out any appeal to the idea of the truth as an explanation for beliefs. Every person thinks that their beliefs are true, otherwise they would not believe them. So being true cannot account for a belief being accepted as true. This would be circular. And as we might want some things to be true, that does not make them true just because we believe them to be so. All beliefs are explained by local norms and interests. But I do not think so. How would we know this to be true, however? And so truth is seen as metaphysical. Can it be seen as metaphysical? If scientists are going to be scientific about science, scientists will most likely appeal to external, natural, causal factors. But can we measure what a community takes to be true? Yes, we can. And can there be an anthropology of science? All communities have rules, even science communities have rules. All have different methodologies and rituals for determining or trying to determine what to believe and how to settle disputes, as well as how the community should be governed. For example, religious, scientific, and political communities all operate under specific guidelines and or frameworks. Neither community is fundamentally superior to one another. What causes belief? Simple appeal to evidence does not explain why the scientists believe what they believe. Remember the underdetermination theory by evidence. What leads a person or people to believe what they believe? We must study their culture in order to understand this. And this course would be the anthropology of science. So our own principles have forced us to admit that our conclusions reflect our own interests. And we need to be open and honest about that. It is recognizing that there is not a problem with having a problem. And we have the problem of reflexivity. Stephen Shapin and Simon Schaeffer have written an article on a debate between Thomas Hobbes and Robert Boyle. I've written on, I can't remember if I've written on Boyle. I think I've written on Boyle, yeah, in my history lectures, and I think I've also written on Thomas Hobbes. But they look at the rise of modern science based not only on historical perspectives, but also on sociological and psychological perspectives. Hobbes, for example, was driven by politics, and Boyle was driven by evidence. But how scientific disputes should be adjudicated. This is what Stephen Shapin and Simon Schaeffer write about. The Royal Society was Boyle's social group, dedicated to science, and it grew out of this dispute. So the model is on the word of no one. Nullius in verba was the motto for the Royal Society. On the word of no one. Science as competing language games. This is another debate between Aristotle and Hobbes. For example, they denied that that a vacuum is possible. How can this even be settled with evidence? Holism, theory, latentness, etc. What if a new question could be asked in a certain way as to fit the evidence or be more central in the debate? Shapin and Schaeffer do not believe that facts exist in and of themselves. Rather, they are interpreted or manufactured by way of a pre-existing socially constructed theory or paradigm. And this is what they talk about in their writings. It depends on how we measure reality and the tools that we use to measure different perspectives of that reality. There is an idea called social constructivism. There are facts, but much of what people think of as independent reality actually depends on the social perspective or dynamic. Society needs to work in the world and with the world in order to construct what is real or factual of the world. And this would provide a universal perspective for science. Then there are other perspectives of science too. I really don't want to go into that. We do have naturalism in the philosophy of science. Either deny Thomas Kuhn or accept relativism. Maybe synthesize a moderate view of Thomas Kuhn's beliefs with other concepts and ideas. So in a synthesis could be empiricism plus the logic of confirmation plus falsificationism plus holism about testing and the web of belief mentioned in Quine. You can see that in my philosophy lectures. Paradigms and research programs, that would be obviously Thomas Kuhn and Emir Lakatos. And then the social structures of science, just recently mentioned. Positivists wanted a logical foundation for science. Naturalists want philosophy to be continuous with science. The idea that disciplines are sharply distinct from one another is an academic fundamental fiction. Many disciplines intertwine and are related. Organized disciplines are helpful, and philosophy trespasses on all disciplines. So we really need to have a kind of a cooperation of all disciplines working together. Asking new questions. There are objections to naturalism, though. Some say that it is circular, and some say that it eliminates philosophy, or at least the epistemological part of philosophy. So how can science be used to solve problems in the philosophy of science when there is no philosophy to start with? And so that would be a good point. Contrasting naturalism with foundationalism. Foundationalism means that science must be understood from the external world to the inner world in order to know or understand the nature of nature. So we're not starting here and then studying that. It's more, we're looking at that and then we're trying to rationalize it here. So naturalists think that this is impossible, however. Plus all attempts since Plato and Descartes have failed. Naturalism does not seek to justify science. Science does not need to be justified. W.V.O. Quine's epistemology naturalized. What he means by that is that Quine believes that epistemological questions should be answered empirically. Epistemology should be reduced to cognitive science, in his opinion. Cognitive science will tell us how beliefs form, change, etc. Then we have Godfrey Smith points out that philosophy can explain things better than pure data can. He thinks that it is absurd to propose that philosophical questions do not exist. He helps philosophy by wanting science to help philosophy. To eliminate philosophy is impossible. Some naturalists suggest that philosophy and science work together as integrated disciplines, such as Godfrey Smith. He thinks that some philosophical questions to consider would be, how do we make sense of the role of values in science? How do we reconcile science with common sense? How do we integrate the various sciences? And he thinks that science can inform philosophy. We get into such ideas as normative naturalism, which means that philosophy answers value questions in science. David Hume thought of a sharp divide between is and ought. Quine thought that there was nothing to divide or distinguish. It is one thing to know how cognitively beliefs are formed, but another to propose what a good belief is and what a bad belief is, or what the essence of good beliefs versus bad beliefs are. Science can inform approaches to these ideas, but cannot solve these perplexing questions. Therefore, philosophy is that which seeks to solve what science cannot. The philosophical topics that science can help solve is the dualism-monism debate in the philosophy of mind, the reason-emotion debates in philosophy of emotion, the free will and determinism debates, for example, and then the moral theory debates, which disproves Kant. We must understand neuroscience, history, and psychology, I think, in order to understand the full benefits that science can bring. Integrating the sciences, many departments are not separated by differences in nature, but by historical, political, and economic and personal influences, as well as scientific. So, form of questions vary among fields, ending up in contradictory answers and incompatible models. Philosophy can arbitrate between entrenched disciplines, i.e., human behavior is studied by cognitive science, behavioral psychology, sociobiology, sociology, historians of anthropology, etc. And so philosophy is that thing which can arbitrate between different disciplines that are entrenched in similar subject matter. So we have, can we have a philosophy of physics, for example? Quantum mechanics and relativity seem to be incompatible with each other. And that's relatively, that's GR and SR of Einstein. Theoretical physics is hard to distinguish from philosophy. It is very technical philosophy. How naturalists can borrow from Lakatos to solve Nelson Goodman's new riddle of induction. Going by the data available is a more progressive research program until proven otherwise. That is logical. Logical positivism and empiricism. Science, though limited by experience, is grounded in experience. No philosophical a priori knowledge. Popper thinks that science exposes theories through rigorous testing. Falsification is not the core trait of science. Known scientific truths are actually known. Quine thinks that all beliefs are subject to revision, including logic. He thinks that can we reduce all philosophy to science? He does not think that this is possible. Thomas Kuhn thinks that science cannot alone separate is from ought, and that goes back to Hume. It is good science that reveals the truth of the world, fundamental questions answered by scientifically informed philosophy, not the scientific community. Philosophy-free science does not exist, but science can be done whilst examining philosophical baggage. That's the view from Daniel Dennett. Sociology of science, or social science, or the distribution of epistemological labor, funding, etc. Science is responsive to data, but is also affected by social interests, even if those social interests are honestly recognized. And then we end with scientific realism. Does science describe the real world? Common sense seems to suggest so, but others have suggested that this is not so. The positivists thought to postulate a real world would be pursuing into the realm of metaphysics. For example, we see this cup here, but we really don't actually know it's a cup, but we don't see all the molecules and the particles and the atoms and the subatomic parts that make up the cup. We only can see the cup for what it is, not necessarily what it is in and of itself. And that does go back to Kant. But in any case, Karl Popper thought that science tries to describe the real world, but we can never be sure or confident that it has. Kuhn thought experience was always mediated by a paradigm, therefore separating us from an actual reality. And then the strong problem and postmodernists thought words are only social constructions and inherently have no meaning. So as you can see, there are a lot of problems that we face. But thank you for watching the lecture, and stay tuned for more.